Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is my weekly Casual Friday podcast. This week's podcast is all about the Minnesota State Fair, and in particular, the knitting competition. So let's get started. It finally happened, the Minnesota State Fair, and I got to go to it. It was the first time since 2019 I had been to the fair. The fair was canceled in 2020. I was not ready to go back in 2021, and neither were a lot of other people. It was about half the size that it normally would be. And then last year, everything was back to normal, except for me. I wasn't going to go anywhere in a big crowd. But this year, I was ready to go back. And one of the things I love to do at the fair is to really look at the creative activities building. And that's where you'll see the knitting, the crocheting, the quilting, the beadwork, the embroidery, the woodworking, just every kind of handcraft that you can think of is in the creative activities building. And then they also have all of the cooking and baking stuff in that building as well. And one of the things that they have in the creative activities building are two general areas where there are demonstrations. One is of handwork type stuff, and the other one is cooking demonstrations. So there's this booth that's like it's kind of like four-cornered booth, and there will be two guilds or organizations that will be in two of them. So like the Minnesota Knitters Guild was in one of them on Monday, and then there was this other group that does like wood scroll work, and so they were demonstrating stuff and giving away little samples to kids. And then the other half, so the other two corners in a big combined booth, is the Minnesota Weavers Guild. So they've been there every day of the fair for like 80 years. The Weavers Guild was founded in 1940, and then within a couple of years they were at the fair every day, and they continue to do that. So there's usually, in the Weavers Guild side, there's three things going on. There's somebody sitting at one of the floor looms. They warp up at the beginning of the fair, and then whoever's demonstrating brings in their yarn that they're going to use in their shuttles or the boats, whatever they call them. And then they have somebody spinning. That's what I was doing yesterday. I was spinning on a spinning wheel. And then they'll have a third thing that could be something else. So the woman who was there yesterday had a tapestry loom. And so she was demonstrating it's something that's so portable that she could let people try it out so they could see how to do it. I just spend most of my time in the creative activities building, but there are other things I like to see too. I like to go to the animal barns. I like to go to the dairy, not the dairy barn, but the dairy building, and see the carving, the sculpture carving, the butter heads. I like, there's various foods that I like to get. Everybody's got their favorite things that they like to do. And then there's some historical building, Minnesota history related things that I like to visit as well. So because I hadn't been there in so long, I spent Monday just kind of letting myself absorb it and not trying to record anything. I took a couple of pictures, but that was it. And then yesterday when I was there, I did the recording. I recorded all of the knitting and all of that kind of thing. I didn't record everything I saw, and I didn't see everything at the fair, and everything that I did see and record, I'm not sharing necessarily. I'm trying to just share the things that I think you'll be most interested in. So one thing I want to mention is I cut all of the sound out of the video that I shot, and it's just a voiceover. So I was using this microphone in order to do the recording, but I was sitting in front of my computer with my video editing software going, which takes a lot of CPU on the computer, which means my fan was running, and my computer runs really hot, so I have an additional fan underneath there to keep things cool. Otherwise, the computer will just bog down. So you're going to be able to hear kind of this hum of the fan in the background in the voiceover. So just want to let you know that before we watch the video. First thing I did upon arriving at the fair was drop off my knitting. So this was on Monday, and I was volunteering at the Knitters Guild booth starting at noon. So at 10 o'clock when I arrived at the fair, I dropped everything off. And then I went in search of my first fair food. So traditionally, I like to go to the fair in the morning, and even if I've eaten some breakfast at home, I consider my fair breakfast a caramel apple in a dish. So it's a sliced up apple with caramel sauce on it, or if you live in other parts of the world, caramel, and you have a choice of peanuts, you can get ice cream on it. I just like the caramel apple with the peanuts, and I sat there and I enjoyed myself. I wanted to reacquaint myself with some of the historical buildings that are at the fair, and one of them is this 1890s, I think it was late 19th century anyway, cabin that was relocated to the fairgrounds. They used to have people living in the cabin during the fair and doing demonstrations, but it's closed now. What I love about this cabin is that it is the same size of cabin that my great-grandfather was born in and grew up in. There were 9 kids, 6 that lived, plus his parents. The footprint of this is 15 feet by 20 feet, and then there's a loft, which is where all the kids would have slept. But that gives me a reminder of kind of what my background is. Then I began to walk through the fair, and I passed the giant slide. Gives me a lot of fond memories. This is something we always did with our kids. We would slide down with them on the same burlap sack with them sitting in front of us. So I had to take a picture of that. Next on the list was the Minnesota Territorial Pioneers, or the Territorial Pioneers of Minnesota, something like that. It's an organization that I'm actually qualified to belong to because I have ancestors who were here in Minnesota while it was still a territory before statehood. So they have a lot of interesting objects inside, and I wanted to go visit that again. One of the things that I was surprised to see inside the building, I don't recall seeing it before, or it didn't strike me as being that interesting, like memorable. It was interesting, but maybe wasn't as memorable as it was this time. This is a display case of Horticulture silk thread. When I did my knitting project where I knit a sweater from each decade from the 1890s to the 1990s, my 1920s selection was a pattern from the Horticulture Silk Company. So I just loved seeing a display of actual silk threads from that company. They have a lot of really interesting things on display there. They had a whole bunch of lace. All of the items in this cabinet have been donated by different people to the collection of the Territorial Pioneers. Next up, I headed over to the Horticulture Building. I always like to see the crop art. There were a lot of people there, and I didn't stand in line in order to get to see every single one of the images, but these are all created with seeds of different sorts. They create these different pictures, and you can see the one at the top is like a Bruce Springsteen album cover, only in his back pocket he's got an ear of corn instead of, I think it was a red kerchief or something in the original album cover. The next thing I did was I went back to the Creative Activities building to look at all of the knitting. So this particular case right here is all of the first place winners. So there are 51 different categories of hand knitting. So you'll see a bunch of different sweaters that get first place, and you may not be able to understand what the difference is, and it could be that one is all over texture and another one has a limited texture, or one is a cardigan versus a pullover. So these are all the first place winners, and so those are the small blue ribbons come from the Minnesota State Fair, and then there are various yarn shops and organizations that award those giant rosettes for something in particular, like Scandinavian, the Ingebretson Scandinavian Gifts, that was for the best sort of Scandinavian sweater. And then you'll see the purple ribbon that's sweepstakes. They have a category in blankets and afghans, and then they have one for other hand knitting. And the judges will decide of all of the things, all of the blankets, which one from the different categories gets the sweepstake. So I was trying to get that Gansey there, but there was a reflection from the outdoors. You can see all the people, the reflection of people outside of the Creative Activities building. So this is always my favorite thing. And they do actually put people's names on their items nowadays. They used to only do that if you got like the sweepstakes. But now everybody who has a ribbon gets their name on it. So there's another shot of that Gansey that's a little better. This is a nearby case that has some crocheted items in it. And a lot of times you'll see these cases around the building that will have a theme to them. So you'll see things from all different activities. So here is the other really big case. This has got all of the other place winners. So yellow is 5th place. They give 1st through 5th place. And so anything with a ribbon was placed, but those things in the back, those sweaters hanging up, they don't have ribbons. They didn't win anything. Pink is 4th place. So again, these are all of the things that won 4th place. Now, occasionally you'll see something that got a ribbon that's in one of those specialty cases somewhere else that's with a theme. You might not see every single thing here. But most of them will be here. And so that's always the challenge if you've entered the fair, is to try to find all of your items, because most of the time if you want a ribbon, they're in this case, but not always. So the pink, like I said, is 4th place. The red is 2nd place. So these are all of those items here. There's just I just love seeing all of the beautiful colors and all the different variations on things that people have chosen to knit. And then the white is 3rd place. So they are just hanging things from everywhere. There's mittens and socks hanging from the ceilings. There's blankets and shawls laid down on the bottom. Sweaters usually are on mannequins. Sometimes they're on hangers. And you see that colored hat there with the oranges and pinks? That was Steve. Stopped by the Knitters Guild booth to say thank you for your videos. I learned to knit 3 years ago, and it's with your help that I was able to get good enough to enter something. And he got 3rd place for that hat. It's gorgeous. So these are mostly things that didn't get ribbons, and they are just packed in there. There were 351 entries this year, which is up from last year by quite a bit. There was knitting all over the building, that in places that I wouldn't have seen it before, when they maybe had 260, 280 entries altogether. I'm going to come back to creative activities in just a little bit, but I wanted to show you something that is traditional for me to check out every year at the fair, and that is the dairy building. Inside the dairy building, we have this sculptor who is working every day of the fair. We have daughters of dairy farmers in Minnesota can run to be a dairy princess. And so there are 12 princesses, and then they crown one of them Princess K of the Milky Way. She's got the little tiara on her butter head right here. And so she gets carved on the first day of the fair, and then each day another princess gets carved for the entire duration of the fair. Of course, you have to go to the sheep barn if you are interested in knitting. They have a big display here to talk about sheep growing in Minnesota. These sheep were very excited about the farmer in the adjoining pen. They thought they were going to get some treats, and they were screaming their heads off. And he made some comment about, oh, you got your food already. You're fine. So these sheep have all just been freshly shorn. Some of them have coats on, so I think they haven't been shown yet in their competition. The shearing job on the sheep who don't have coats on is immaculate. It is amazing. They are just trying to show these sheep in the best form that they possibly can. These have little fleece booties down around their legs. They're just gorgeous. So this is what the sheep barn looks like. There's an adjoining building that they call it the poultry barn, that's mostly rabbits. But it's pretty big. It's a pretty big facility here, and this is just for the sheep. These are Southdown sheep, and I thought they might be because they're smaller and they have fleece all over their entire face, which isn't common amongst all different breeds. They can get wool blind if it grows over their eyes, but these have been sheared pretty recently. So there are also rides. There's a big midway. This is just in a random place in the fair, but this is a ride you would not get me on unless one of my family members was in danger. So this is just a view of one of the streets of the fair to kind of show you the trees and the shadiness and people walking around enjoying the fair. And this is, they have this Space Needle thing. I've never been in that. And here's the Creative Activities building again from the outside. Walking up to it to see all of the cool stuff that is inside. This is one of the themed cases. That was Minnesota Twins, which is a baseball team. And then here is the sewing. So you'll notice that on the mannequin heads, there are hats. So there's always so many hats that have been entered into the fair that didn't win. And so they put them to help just really decorate the cases as much as possible. But that's one of the reasons it can be challenging to find what you entered, especially if you didn't ribbon. But if it's a hat and you didn't ribbon, it's probably on a mannequin head. So, there's so many quilts too. So they will decorate backgrounds with quilts in all different cases everywhere. So you never know what you're going to find in a given case, which makes it great for looking as a visitor, but it is, as a competitor, it can be frustrating because it's such a large building and there's so many crafts. I'm really only showing a few things. Here is a ribbon winner for a vest, and it's in the sewing cabinet because it went nicely with that skirt. So I believe they have students at the U who are doing things in, like, I don't know, set design or whatever, who come in here and put up all of these displays. Who look for things that color coordinate, or who look for things that, you know, would be good for one of the themed cases. I don't know how many people they have doing this and how long it takes them, but I can't even imagine attempting to do something like this personally. So now we're going to see the weaving. So this is the case that you see all the entries from the Weavers Guild, but you also see hand-spun yarn. You'll see the skeins of yarn hanging there. They only have a couple of different categories for hand-spun yarn. So each category is going to have a range of types of yarns that might get entered into it. So it makes it challenging for hand spinners to have any sort of sense of what might be a good thing to enter. So you can see the little belts and straps that were woven there as well. Clothing items, all kinds of really cool things. The ribbon colors are consistent throughout the fair. Red, blue is first, red is second, white is third, pink is fourth, and yellow is fifth. And you don't have to, they don't always give a ribbon for every place. There was a sweater category this year where there were 4 entries. There was a 3rd place and a 4th place, and no first, second, or fifth. And so 2 people didn't get any ribbon, and there were 3 ribbon spots that weren't given out. So again, we've got some themed cases. These are bugs and insects in this particular one. Ladybugs and butterflies and all kinds of crafts. And we've got some more Halloween stuff. There were a couple of cases with Halloween themed items, which are fun to see. And these are just beautiful, beautiful colors, like stained glass or things that kind of remind you of stained glass. So when I look at something like this, everything looks amazing, and I'm like, how could that get 4th place? And then I look at 1st place, like, oh my goodness. When you don't know anything about the craft, everything can seem like amazingly difficult. So they have a category of things like called collections. So people like collect postcards or something, and that have with historical information on it. I don't know a whole lot about that. This quilt was amazing. I didn't even record the big hanging quilts that are on boards that you can flip through. So Inga Brettson's Scandinavian Gifts Award, that went to that tablecloth there, which was done, I believe, in Hardanger, which is a traditional craft that moved its way up from like Persia or something, but in Norway it was known as white work, and there are a lot of people of Scandinavian descent here in Minnesota, and so there are a lot of people who still do Hardanger. So this is all kinds of different crafts here. Again, you can see some Hardanger there as well. I'll leave a link to what Hardanger is down in the show notes. Just beautiful. Again, I can't say gorgeous. And this is some kind of a rug thing. Sometimes I have no idea what the craft even is. It's just really cool to see what people like to do creatively. So this is inside the middle of the Creative Activities Building. I'm just kind of giving you a panorama. This is why I couldn't record. I didn't see everything myself, and I certainly didn't record everything I saw, just a lot. So this was on display across from where I was demonstrating in the Knitters Guild, and someone came over and wanted to know what craft that was done. I said, well, it looks like stained glass. And she said, no, it's a textile. And I looked at it and I'm like, oh, that is cross stitch. That is amazing. So as I said, there were 350 some entries, and your knitting can show up anywhere. And this year there was a lot of knitting in this display case where they tend to show like the hand-carved boats, handmade wooden boats. There were just so many shawls and sweaters in this particular case here. I've never seen anything like it. So these beautiful boats that were in here were just amazing. There were a lot of fishermen sweaters in this particular case because of the boat theme. It's amazing how many Aran sweaters I saw in this case, but all of the shawls lined up along the edge here was something I had just never seen. There's sweaters too, so pretty cool. And these things people make with wood is just incredible. More sweaters with boat themes, and then a random wooden cow. So you never know. And then we've got a collection of like skulls or something in there. So you just probably of sea creatures if it's in that case. I'd love it if my brother could see this. He's a woodworker. I think he'd really appreciate that. My friend Elizabeth sent a picture from that boat and said, I never expected to find one of my sweaters in a boat. More quilts. The quilts are just everywhere. So I was sitting out on a bench resting, and that's the Minnesota State Fair gopher mascot that went by on a golf cart, waving to everyone. Back inside the Creative Activities Building, and this is a themed case. Again, these are owls and birds of all different sorts in this particular case. I'm not even sure what all of these crafts are, some of them. Like this is like a metal welded bird of some sort. I don't even know what category that would be. And then there's wood burned things, and yeah, I have no idea. It's just amazing to see how many different creative, there's beadwork, stamp collecting. This one's got dogs in it. Dogs and foxes and things like that. And some sweaters and hats in here as well. There was even a third place sweater that was done in stranded colorwork, but it had a little animal in it, so they put it in this case. That person must have looked forever to find their thing. So this is the demonstration booth where I was yesterday for 4 hours. I was demonstrating spinning. They had some really nice display cases to show weaving and what the classes are. People who were demonstrating had their things on the counter. And then we had, this is what the booth looked like. It's a double-sized booth. There's like 4 booths in this central area altogether, but we get two of them get combined. And then all of the tools and things that are used for spinning are in the display case as well. So I believe I mentioned in the voiceover narrative that there are 51 categories of hand knitting, and there were 351 entries this year. So the average number of entries per category is 12, but the median is 9. So there were a number of categories that had 4 entries, for example, but cowls had 41. So there's some categories that get a lot of entries, and then a lot of the sweater categories might get in the 20s. There's certain things that get in a lot of things might get in the teens or 20s. And then there's a few that get 4, and then a few that get just a ton. So the categories change over the years. So it was only in the recent past few years that they added the cowls category. So what they do over the years is they kind of watch to see how things, get lower and lower entries. And if they're not getting anybody entering for maybe a couple of years in a row, they might eliminate that category or combine it with another one. So I saw that one year there was no entries for bedspreads, but then they got like a handful of them the next year. And so that one continues on. When I entered a vest years ago, there were 2 or 3 categories at the time. There was like color work category, there was texture, and there may have been a third one that was just plain, but the plain may have been combined with the texture. Not 100% sure. But nowadays there's so few vests, and by vests I mean pullover, sleeveless pullover, and it could be what in the UK they call a waistcoat with buttons. Either one, it has no sleeves. They've only got one vest category now. They've combined everything together, and that can be trickier when you have very different techniques that are competing against each other. It can be harder to compare. You're not quite comparing apples to apples. It's not apples to oranges either. It's more like different varieties of apples, maybe. I don't know. So there are 4 sort of catch-all categories where if there isn't something specifically that you have done that fits into any of the other categories, you can put it into those. And so it's 4 different categories, and there's wearable or not wearable. And then for each of those, it could be felted or not felted. So that combination of things, there's 4 different categories that can add as the bucket for things where maybe there just isn't much interest, or interest is growing over the years and they haven't quite decided to add the category yet. They get to some point where they've got multiple years where they've got multiple entries and they can add a new one. So besides these categories, these are all things for children or adults, like garments and accessories, hats, mittens, scarves, socks, gloves, sweaters, all those kinds of things. And then there's different categories of afghans and blankets that are different sizes, but nothing for babies in hand knitting. That goes in garment making, and that would include baby blankets that could be knitted or crocheted, and things like sweaters or hats or bonnets or anything like that could be crocheted or knitted. So those are in a completely different thing apart from hand knitting. There's also machine knitting. There's also a crochet. And then there's the senior citizens competitions for each of the different kinds of creative activities. Although I don't know if every single category of creative activity also has a senior citizens competition. I don't know, but there is one for knitting as well. And so anybody over 65 or older can enter into the senior citizen competition if they would prefer. But I know several knitters who are 65 or older, and they'll just choose, oh, this one I'm going to enter into the main hand knitting, and this one I'm going to enter in the senior citizens. They do like that. So I was looking through the digital archives in the past week to see how the competition had changed over the years. And I decided to look back like 100 years ago to see what was going on in 1923. And so there's just one little paragraph about the knitting and who won. There was maybe a couple of different types of knitted things. There was lace making and a few different things. And they would show who got first and who got second. And Then I saw there was also a category that was similar to the senior citizens category. Only it was like old ladies activities is what they called it, because this wasn't called creative activities back then. It was called women's activities, and it was the women's building. So over the years they changed it. So it isn't just women's activities, it's anybody can do it. I'm glad that in a few years, if I decide to enter the senior citizens competition, I don't have to say that I'm entering the old ladies competition. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.